And we begin tonight with some non-physical medical news. The way to... Not a moment too soon either. Some non-physical medical news. The way to keep a problem existing is to keep talking about what a problem it is. How else can you rationally explain the continuing presence and mass popularity of much that constitutes the heart of man's civilization? One day, two lions were laying in the tall grass talking, and one of them said, "I've heard these men creatures speak of there being some secret to life." And no one replied, "Yeah, me too." And the first one said, "What do you make of it?" And no one just shrugged. Is it any wonder that men are so further evolved than lions? Well, discounting any talking lions. Another distinction between man's instinctive biological life and his intellectual psychological one is that the former is not engaged in efforts to expand its scope, while the latter literally survives by such. There was once a man who lived inside a bubble, and after many years of studying his surroundings, became quite knowledgeable about the bubble. But so what? He was still living in a friggin' bubble. Brief items about two guys. One guy says he sees the ultimate in the expansion of civilization as being the time upcoming wherein everybody is talking about everybody else. One guy says that besides just staying alive, he sees all effort as unnecessary effort. For the longest time, one man felt like he was rehearsing and preparing for something. I wonder what, thought his mind. The idea of there being some secret about life, the knowledge of which would change everything in a man, is to some a most intriguing one. But what even general fans of the notion ignore is the possibility that somewhere along the way they have already confronted it head on and didn't much like it. All wolf packs that survive as a group have a leader. No leader of a wolf pack is ever chosen on the basis of its talent, sophistication, or charitable instincts. Leaders of wolf packs are not chosen anyway. They seize control. And now that we've cleared that up, how do you explain the appearance and power that the dominant thought patterns, often referred to as one's individual personality, have over your intelligence? If you hear it said that even a small amount of alcohol will affect your consciousness, and you have to say, for better or worse, you didn't really have to ask. Corollary. If someone tells you that small amounts of alcohol or drugs do not noticeably affect their level of consciousness, and they're correct, then their natural level is so low as to be downright frightening. There is always scant space in man's entertainment schedule for the mystical, and especially so when it is presented pretty non-mystically. Moral: the simple don't like to look at the bottom of their feet. Quiz: which will burst first, an overstuffed stomach or an overstuffed mind? Boy, what a dumb quiz. Everybody knows that a mind can't be overfilled. I have got that right? One day a man, strike the G, paused to ponder. A man paused to ponder. If there is a secret to life, then has the secret changed throughout the history of man, as indeed has man himself changed? Or could it be that the secret remains always the same while man's conception of it shifts? There was once a bird lover who decided he wanted to teach frogs to sing. He was sure that based on their natural ability to make croaking sounds, that they could be led into more melodic modes. Sometime later, in the midst of this effort, a mystic passed his way, realized what the man was attempting, and figuring it to be none of his business, since he wasn't asked, went on by without saying anything. Moral: genes never lie, but neurons would sell their own mother the Brooklyn Bridge. In the continuing collective march onward, those in the back of the parade remain concerned over matters of illness, death, and wealth, while those further up front try to expand their interest. Yet none who accept their particular position in the procession as proper and normal are ever able to see above the heads of the marchers all around them, and thus see the direction in which it is all moving. Anything can prove interesting to one more conscious, unless it is less conscious than he is. When one man read the story of the sculptor who explained his art by saying that he'd take a large piece of marble, decide what he wanted to sculpt there out of, a horse, let us say, then he'd simply chisel away anything that didn't look like a horse. This man was suddenly sorry that he couldn't use the same approach relative to making something better out of his mind, since, as he said, everything about my mind as I find it seems to actually look like my mind. But do remember this: for every one person who believes that there is no way out, there are at least another million who believe so as well. A viewer writes, on a recent show you read an item that included someone saying that the great thing about us being born as we're going to be is that no effort is required later in life to achieve it. Well, I'd like to request that you never ever repeat that one, yours, etc. The speaker addressed the audience. The difference between those who know and routine thinkers is that the latter always condition their remarks with terms such as, "May I present the possibility that," or "the evidence suggests," whereas those who know simply say what they have to say. And from the crowd a voice asked, "But so too do vacuous-headed fanatics. So what's the difference between them and those who actually know something?" And the speaker replied, "The know-nothing fanatics will always have a following of some sort." And the insightful in the audience, recognizing the profundity of what was just said, immediately left. Only ordinary minds worry about being fooled and misled by others. Those with any extraordinary potential are only concerned with how their own mind is wired up to fool and mislead itself. And, if you're interested, even beyond that, a stage wherein all normal notions of being fooled or not being fooled, or being correct or incorrect, lose all their imaginary significance. In the city, the simple gossip and talk of physical things, while the more sophisticated make an attempt at things intellectual. But come the weekend, they're all in the same league. Just the emerging realization that life itself is alive begins to answer all of man's unanswerable questions and clear the deck of all unfathomable mysteries. Yeah, but what are devotees of gods, magicians, and UFOs going to do when all such vehicles finally land and are found to be filled with silly putty and trick mirrors? The equation that must be imploded is I plus not I equals reality. The insides of one man's head is too small a space in which to confine one's mind. On one world, they had a law that prohibited anyone who knew the secret from talking about it after they had known it for 20 years, or after everyone they had known for 20 years had died, whichever came first. In a distant galaxy was once a planet on which all creatures with no voice to speak of were issued bullhorns. As silly as this sounds, it begins to make sense as you begin to draw nigh the secret. Okay, says one man, if thoughts are the drugs of the mind, then what I want to know is, where are they being produced? Huh? Tell me that. A certain man who had always enjoyed the story of the zookeeper who wrote the game breeder to order new acquisitions, saying, Dear sir, please send me 2 mongooses. But thought better of it and tried again. Dear sir, please send me 2 mongoose. But found that didn't sound correct either, so finally took the approach, Dear sir, please send me a mongoose, yours, etc. P.S. Please send another one also. But this certain man changed the story from it being about a ferret-like carnivore to being about consciousness, wherein a man writes to life thusly, Dear life, please make me better in this regard. P.S. Please make me much better, yours, etc. Another test that will probably never become very popular. One way to tell that you're still not using your intellect to its fullest is that you continue to feel some real need to listen to things other people have to say of a serious nature. Part of Muhammad's popularity among a few was due to the smiles his fresh-drawn sword would bring. In a certain mystical school was once posted a notice that said, a man who knows something and weighs 200 pounds is not the same as he would be if he knew the same thing but weighed 180. And underneath it someone eventually wrote, but is the difference worth the 20 pounds? Yeah. To which a response soon appeared, why not try it and see? Throughout history have been numerous voices claiming to realize that everything is connected, but damn few of them ever put it to the old testo. Or to put it another way, by updating a cliche, if Plato hadn't died, they'd have had to kill him. One man kept a mirror by his bed, and as soon as he awoke each morning, he'd hold it up to his mind and say, okay, now what was it we were talking about when I went to sleep? Yeah. Possible moral. Never challenge an elephant to play the accordion. Well, come on, you got to have some sense of fair play. Jeez. After much reading, a certain chap finally paused to muse. Why is it that throughout all known history, amongst all the world's people, they all have some story of a time back near creation, wherein after man began to speak with God, he almost immediately said something so intolerable as to cause the deity to drive him from this direct communication? I feel certain this tale tries to tell me much more than on the face seems, but exactly what remains to me unclear. It can prove interesting to consider how much words hide in addition to what they reveal. And even more interesting to realize that words, no matter what, will never give themselves away. If you tell people that the secret of life is up in the sky, or known only when you die, or is too weird and mysterious to ever be explainable, then you might be able to get their attention. Well, as opposed to the 2x4 approach. And if you're right, why do you keep referring to people when I know damn well you're talking about me? One way to tell that you're making some forward motion in the quest is that you require fewer and fewer hints and more bricks right to the face. With its many layers and textures, an onion seems a most complex structure until you peel it down to its core and voila, discover there's nothing there. In all of man's dreams of alien crafts from outer space exists an undocumented underground world wherein resides creatures from another form of outer space. So reflected one man, I'll bet that only the true neural adventurer can, without fear, let go when he is hanging on to the edge of a cliff by his fingertips. In fact, the more I think about it, I'll just wager that if a real such explorer found himself sans a cliff, he'd provide one. Older, mature neurons are all the time complaining about how the younger ones are so irresponsible and unreliable. And pertinent there, too, they all yell, "Yay!" The way to determine with mathematical accuracy exactly just how dumb you are is to count the number of things you think about that other people say are important and should be thought about.
No.
Do it later. Now, I'd advise you men to take your hands out of your pocket. At least you count more than maybe is necessary. Try to be fair. One man found himself with a talking dog. But as it turned out, it wasn't a dog. And as it turned out, what he was doing wasn't actually talking. But still, he found himself with the beast. When the speaker arrived and saw who the audience consisted of, instead of addressing them, he doused them and was done with it. To think of the mystical quest as being man's search for a transcendent state of being is, in the first stages, an ill-conceived description. Better would be to think of it as his desire to simply cure his normal jewel one. While the ordinary continue to find bad news perfectly proper and acceptable. If you don't know what's going on, then all of your impressions of what is are negative. Moral to be generally ignored. A five-eyed man in a four-eyed land finds entertainment in short supply. As he sat on a park bench looking out over the city, a man thought, since there are many who live on the upper floors of the buildings, and just as many who stay down below, then there must be at least two major forms of the mystical quest, one match to each of the two groups. He then sat quietly for a while as he mulled over what he had thought, until a pigeon flew over and shit on his head. Just as, at local levels, a patient's recovery can be enhanced by the physician sending his best wishes along with his prescription for medication, so too can one's chance of using new information be improved if its source has no personal interest in the recipient's reactions thereto. Cruising around the countryside. On one world, the way you see more when you go out for a drive is to slow the vehicle down. Some there, in fact, learn how to stop and get out for a while to look around. One day, a certain man who made periodic attempts to try the mystical path said to his mind, "If you'd treat me as nice as does my stomach, I might get somewhere with this." To which his mind replied, "If you'd feed me as well as you do your stomach, I might be able to oblige." All in the case of most people, it's probably a good thing that their inner organs can't really talk. One man who holds no beliefs in gods or sinister conspiracies says that nonetheless he still increasingly senses the presence of some unseen force overseeing our destiny. The problem regarding the mind's apparent limits and all attempts to push it there beyond is like this. It's most difficult to get a man to see who's just pretending to be blind. A man wrote to the abrasions to your face doctor and asked, "Dear doctor, amidst all the circuitous sounding talk that surrounds activities such as this, I am still driven to wonder just what is the difference between a so-called mystic who knows what's presumed to be some unknowable stuff and someone who's simply crazy and out of touch with reality. Could you, dear doctor, answer this for me?" And to the best of my knowledge, he could have, but he didn't. What the more conscious knows makes sense to them, whether it does to anyone else or not. Some additional info regarding the great mystical quest. The actual distance from here to where the grail is hidden is not measurable in miles or even inches. And enlightenment doesn't any more happen to you than it doesn't. And yet none of this is permissible to the alert. And yet none of this is permission to the alert to get off the train before Istanbul. One legend says that Adam was the very first surveyor, and that no sooner had he been driven from Eden than he began laying out the right-of-way for tracks to you-know-where. Moral without a conscience. Only the simple think of the past as sad. Moral without even a pretext of a conscience. Only the simple think of the past. Everyone's mind is born with a best friend. You. And if you wrote the doctor and the doctor said, don't write me. Often do mystics begin wanting to turn out a baked Alaska or a peaches flambé, to eventually have their taste buds sharpened for the likes of plain custard and pound cake. Some interplanetary religious news. On one world, the creatures conceived of God as being a rather pointed stick poked directly in your eye. Yeah, that's tempting. Looking around at his natural surroundings. Looking around at his natural surroundings, one man's mind suddenly cried out, "Help! I'm a real mind trapped inside the body of a pretend one." Yes, it's a good thing for many that in the intellectual realm, cross-dressing is not a crime. I can wait a second on that if it'll help. The simple, if their face be held up in front of an oncoming bullet, will, as a cheap defense, always plead fear. Now I ask you, what can be done with the likes of those? And worse yet, what do the likes of those want done with them? As Buddha was just about to pack it in for the day, he said to Jesus, "Turn out the lights when you come to bed." How about the guy who was looking out over the city? Remembering what that represents. And pondered the fact that many people live more or less, most of their lives, in the upper floors, while just as many live down below. He further presumed that in that case, within the context of a quest for some greater degree of understanding and consciousness, there must be at least two major forms, one match for each of the two. This is still tied to the dual nature of man, of course. But consider the fact that, let's take religion again as the public market form, the public form, the commonly known form of any attempted transcendental effort. And notwithstanding the fact that there are graduations within the two major divisions that my little man made up before the pigeon got the best of him. Brought about a moment of white-like epiphany, if not serendipity. Never mind. And there was another item in there that pointed out in the general parade as it moves onward, that those in the back of the parade continue to be concerned about matters of health, death, and wealth, while those further up toward the front attempt to engage their attention in things a bit more sophisticated. But for the sake of sparking this off, would you take my rhetorical suggestion that that's somewhat surprising to hear it described that those at the back of the parade, which constitute well over half the people on this planet at any particular moment, well, just linger toward the back. They might move back up a few minutes later, a split second later, 2 years later, they might wander up closer to the middle. But as a rule, you have the parade, if it was seen from above, and it was in a linear configuration, it would look like a snake that had swallowed a bowling ball and had digested same almost to its elimination area. In other words, it would look like it would go down here and then it would get lumpier and larger toward the end of the parade. Back there, I was going to suggest that you might at least find it rhetorically surprising for it to be presented that their main concerns continued to be health, death, and wealth. But consider, even though they're not supposed to be doing any better, but consider, even though people, as headlines and as headings of text and sermons and titles of books, try and present as being otherwise, but the large part of what passes for religious spiritual activity on this planet, and not just limited to mainstream religion, into any, as nowadays is being called New Age again, which you don't think about that nowadays is being called New Age again. The commonly referred to as the occult, the psychic sciences and all of that, and the arts, that is about what it's limited to, is matters of illness, death, and wealth. The mainstream we can fairly well leave after a brief consideration. What do people pray for? What is it that seems to drive the most religious? From an ordinary street level view, we're talking about the sincerely serious religious people. Somebody's dear old grandmother who goes to Mass all the time. And if you ask her, besides, if you could get any verbal answer after all those years out of her as to why her attendance continues apace, you know, what she involved with, when she prays to the Mother Mary, what does she ask for? If she tries to solicit God's favor and His attention, what is it you're concerned with? You would be hard-pressed to find any example come from an ordinary person's lips that did not have something to do with illness, death, and wealth. There's not much more to say about that. But go into the areas that historically, not just 1990s New Age phenomenon, but throughout the history of man, that which is passed for being some form of mystical activity. What are they involved with? Always, including today. You can find a magazine, whatever the title would be, Mysticism in the 21st Century, or Today's Mysticism. That's probably what it'd be. Today's Mystic, or Today's Mysticism. And regardless of what might be the teasers on the cover, once you open it up, what's it going to be? I can go ahead and answer for you. We'll even have to look. I'll just say roughly. Somewhere between 60 and 70% of it's going to be about illness. For some reason now they are extremely interested. It's always something, but now they're extremely interested and have been for some years. Mystical magazines, and they can even have subtitles or subcategories. Today's mysticism for the Zen practitioner in the West, or today's mysticism with a special consideration for the Western yogi. And whatever it is, and you turn into it, and there's going to be about 60 or 70% of it having to do with that wonderfully intriguing, encouraging area of cancer. If it's not about how you might cure cancer by rubbing sweet potato peelings on your feet, on the soles of your feet, it'll be an endless number of stories of people telling you all the horrible things that's happened since they've had cancer. And how many members of their family died of cancer. And all the horrible treatments they've had to have, and thus far they've lost 2 or 3 of their limbs and part of their ear and face. But hey, I mean, what's a yogi practitioner to do but press on and of course write about it and whine. The reason I keep laying on some of this, there's no doubt that the idea of health, the idea of the mind now being able to think about instinctive silent realms and think about health. It is a simple person's, and you can be a simple person now and have a PhD, but it is a simple adult man, as opposed to a child playing with himself sexually. It's like a sophisticated adult man's now personal private hobby. Of course, I would also then mix up the examples and say that's the real form from a mystic's view of self-abuse. Forget the former. At any rate, health. And you do understand, all of you regular viewers, I went ahead and laughed for you. I knew you would. All you regular viewers out there across the country and in those wonderful foreign ports, especially our kind viewer is only a couple in Vladivostok. Somebody wrote me and challenged me to try to say it again real fast. The reason I keep bringing it up is you do miss, because there's so much a part of ordinary thinking, and it's not an attack on these magazines or New Age cults and all of it, because it's nothing new. But consider, when I go into the dramatics, is not to turn it into a polemic on somebody, in this case some New Age group or another, but to get you to see that it starts off in a context, the best that the mind can do at ordinary levels. That a mind, here it is, we've got a magazine, it's not just one mind, we've got groups of people, they've invested money, it's got national distribution, at least for the time being. It's a beautifully produced, and you look down the masthead and you've got hundreds of people involved with it. Advertisers have sunk money into it, and the purpose of it, of course the purpose is to make money, but on the surface the purpose is, the reason they started, I'm not assigning any nefarious motives to the people who started. Those who started wanted to be involved. They wanted to present some message, or they're still trying to scratch themselves somewhere. And so here it is, a wonderful opportunity to share with their fellow man their great mystical quest. And they will state in the first issue, and then it'll become part of the masthead perhaps, they'll state as pithily as possible a 1 or 2 sentence description of why we started mysticism today. And you read it and you think, well, by God, this is my kind of people. This is it. Give me that magazine. You don't care about the price. Let me see that. And they will state, maybe I overdid by saying 1 or 2 sentences. The first issue, they'd probably devote many pages to publisher's declaration of intent. And he would probably run to a large part of issue 1, stating, of course, spending a lot of the time giving you, as I'm sure you would have it no other way, all of the interesting, pertinent facts of his personal life. He will spend all that advising you, confiding in you, opening himself up to the many heartbreaks and not overlooking the several bouts of cancer he's had. But he'll go into the great amounts of effort and search and how many yogis he went through and how all the disappointments, just like you, dear reader, the many times I thought I'd found a true guide, and it turned out that the guy on weekends would play lotto. Or, God knows what. I mean, the kind of disappointments. Or worse yet, the one true leader he thought he'd found came down with cancer too. So that was enough of that. But at any rate, you understand, it sets up the whole, I'm just using this magazine as a small-time metaphor for a big-time phenomenon in human life. But here's this magazine, and you read the purpose, the stated purpose. He spends part of half the first issue, and it scans just right. That's it. It's just almost a replay, you might feel, if you were the average interested reader, a replay of your own personal journey and quest up to that point. And the editor probably concludes by saying, and striving to stay as alert and interested as I am in the great quest for the answers and to return to the great Godhead, or whatever terms he's using, he's saying, then I too, or I do not claim, even though I am now the editor and the founder of this magazine, I do not claim any superior knowledge. I am like you, dear reader. I am still on the search, and I hope that it never changes. And we invite you to join us each month here to continue hand in hand this search together. And you think, this is it. Well, at least, I don't know whether he has the answer, but this is my kind of stuff. In the next issue, or the rest of that one, you suddenly turn to it, And it's just almost entirely about being sick. So one reason this gets no reaction is everybody's so much used to it, you think, well, sure, what's the point? I don't know how well this one read. That's why I was going to redo it. Maybe rewrite it as I'm going along here. But to think of the mystical quest in the first stages I may or may not go into, but in the first stages of anyone's and the impersonal version of the mystical quest, to think of it as being a search for a transcendental state of being, which sounds proper. My imaginary new magazine, my editor could have said the purpose of the magazine. He'd have said that thus far his life has been involved with the great mystical quest, whatever terms he might have been using. And he might even have said some term like, he might try to describe, well, what is it? Can we even come to any common definition between the magazine, between myself and you, the dear potential reader, as to what the mystical quest consists of? What are we about? So that we do not harm one another, and we may come from different religious and racial and nationalistic backgrounds, but we're all part of the same great cosmic mix. We're all little spokes on the great cosmic wheel trying to roll together for the common good. So let's at least try and agree on some sort of common terminology, description, that the mystical quest, without any doubt, is each right-thinking man and woman's desire for a transcendental state, that is, to move to a great higher state of consciousness or of being. To think of the mystical quest in the first stages, to think of it as being a man's search for a transcendental state of being, is an ill-conceived description in the first stages. What would be better is to call it what it is. Men can't do it, which is what that magazine's doing I'm describing. It's not a state, it's not a search, it's not a desire, it's not a hunger for another higher state of consciousness. I know they say it is. Everybody says it is. But then what is it? I was suggesting, if it was possible, there was just a little, you understand, a kind of impossible humor there, or an impossible situation. But a better description would be, between us, it is not a search, no matter what they say. All you got to do is look at the reality of it, look at the workings of it. They will all stand in line, from religion on down to the latest, most obscure crackpot mystical cult, and say, well, our intention is to rise, to discover, to go to mutate to some, and then they describe it as higher state of consciousness, different level of being, something. That's what we're doing, is trying to jump up to there. That is an ill-conceived description, being the charitable sot that I am, put it that way. A better description, that is, a truer description, is that men, without knowing it, what they're searching for, what they're really trying to do, is to cure. The state they're in now. And that is not the same. Someone's mind could try and suddenly do a tap dance and try to say, well, to escape or to cure your natural state of being, our normal state, our present state, is an attempt, is a hunger for a higher state. You can say that. You can make the words. I could defend that. But that's not the point. You've missed it. That is why religions and my fictitious magazine will spend copious amounts of ink describing just what I've said in a few words, that the purpose of their magazine, the purpose of all real seekers, whether they be Buddhist, Sufist, Christians, Jews, mystics with no name, Native American mystics, whatever the latest, Neo-Mayan mystics. They'll say whatever it is, they will describe it though and say the intent, what we're all after, is this higher state, this Christ consciousness, this cosmic consciousness, the Buddhahood of a blown away higher state of being. They say all of that. What is the reality of it is? after they once state that, once they write out the menu, once they write out their prospectus, that here it is, here's what we're selling to you and ourselves. Here's the purpose of our new subdivision. It's to take us to a new state of consciousness. But if you try to go there, all you find is people, chiropractors, dentists, faith healers, astrologers. But what you find is the actual operations of things of all mystical stripes that say that their intention is to reach a transcendental, that is a higher state of being or consciousness. They all say that, including religion in their own way. But that is not what they do. Because almost all of it, well, a large part of it, is taking place at the rear end of the onward march of humanity. And that whole thing that has not shifted that much. You could say that science, relative to the whole parade, the whole march forward, that science, for instance, in the Western sense of science, has progressed from being back to the point that they used to believe that you dropped an apple and it fell because God wanted it to, or whatever, to getting into the realm of physics, and even quantum physics, but that science, you could say, relatively speaking, to the mass of the parade, went from somewhere back toward the end that was no more than superstition like the most crude forms of religion of the time, that has now moved up. But if there's anything that has not changed drastically, is religion, and within that, or on top of it, all of the public attempted forms of transcendency. They change the terms, that's what makes it a little funny, with no hostility to them calling it now New Age. Because it's always New Age. They just change it. But the operations of it are still at the rear of the parade, which at least you think that there's something amiss there. All you got to do is look, as always, at if that's the way it is, and for some reason life likes it just where it is. But they are back there, and they will run up a banner. They'll be holding up placards saying our intention is to reach a higher state, an expanded state, a transcendent state of being or consciousness. And you can go over to them and say, well, hey, sounds like my kind of stuff. What do we do first? And they go, you got cancer? And you go, well, no. And they go, you're probably going to get it. How you been feeling? And you say, wait a minute. Now I'm just using cancer. And again, it's a metaphor, but they use it seriously. Or worse than that, there's probably some now using it as a metaphor. Like, well, sure, you got cancer and you're going to die, but that's probably some kind of metaphorical lesson from God. Really? I feel much better. Other than the fact that my nose is falling off. Or try it a little more directly. All the public forms of mysticism, although they claim that they are after, that their desire is for a transcendent state of being, and all of those who have anything resembling rationality, who pursue it, agree, yes, that's it. They hear it described at all. They hear the term higher state of consciousness. They hear being privy to the mysteries, as the Greeks and Egyptians used to call it. That is, that suddenly your intelligence can peer so closely into the center of life or into the mysteries of life that your whole being has changed. You're a transformed person in this life, not after death, but in this life. And they go, yes, that's it. So once they state that, that's the premise, that's the intro to the song, that's the prospectus. You go, yes, that's it. I'm in like mind. You all shake hands. They say, well, have a seat, or here we go. You go, okay. They go, you got cancer. Well, no, I don't. Does anybody you know have cancer? Yeah. It is not in operation. It is not being driven. It is not an attempt to achieve a transcendent state of being. What they're trying to do, and I'm saying cure, you remember in quotation marks, because they don't know what it is, but they're trying to cure the split that is their dual nature. They're not trying to achieve, there's a difference. They're not trying to achieve another state of consciousness or of being. They're trying to cure what they perceive to be the flaws in this one. And you make, really, an operational, a meaningful mistake to go, well, that's the same thing. It is not. And the reason that I say it is a meaningful distinction, that if you believe, if you accept the view that even if you follow? If you were listening to this and you're going, well, I hear what you're saying, but you're making a distinction in which there is no difference. Because you're saying that they're just trying to cure what they perceive to be the troubles with their current state, which would produce a new state. Yeah. Your fat ass it will. It does just the opposite. Is why it is a meaningful distinction, even if it appeared to an ordinary mind to be a distinction with no difference. As long as you think, as long as you're accepting the fact that I have current ills, now forget cancer. It's the ill that is the nature of man. That this has got to be cured. That if you heard my news item, you follow, you understand. If I said, well, people are not actually, even those who say they are publicly, throughout history, not just today, but those who say that they're involved with a search for being driven in their search for a higher state, a transcendent state of being, that is not in the first stages. Again, you're going to have to deal with that. In the first stages, that is an ill-conceived, that is an ill-appropriate description. There's one that's much better. And that is what they're actually attempting to do without knowing it, without analyzing that way, is they're simply attempting to cure what they perceive to be the flaws in their present state of consciousness and being. And it is not the same thing, because as long as you accept that latter part, if you want, well, yeah, well, it's the same thing. Yeah, I got to cure what I am now, but that would be the entree, if not the instantaneous movement itself. If I could cure this present state with all of its flaws, that within itself would be a higher state, right? You have been killed without a weapon. Or you have been further or continually confined. And life needs no bars. Because you cannot move as long as you are dealing with without knowing it. It makes it doubly bad if it's needed to be, or doubly sticky, as long as there is the continuing acceptance, the continuing feeling that I have got to cure my present state. That I have got to work out certain problems, but I'm just giving you a nice, open-handed, easy word. Cure. That's what they're attempting to do. And that's what all this thing about illness represents. They don't know what to do with it. Their insight, their understanding is not deep enough to get past that. They take illness to be not only serious, which hell, yeah, it's serious, it'll kill you. So what? Next subject. No, they say, no. Illness is some kind of mystical message from the gods. And in almost all the world's major religions, they attribute ills, physical ills, and death, in the Christian religion specifically, is they attribute it to man's original confrontation, in which he lost, of course, with God, his original sin. It was only then, up until that point, according to the Christian creation myth, and there are traces of it all over the world, but he originally, Adam and Eve, were immortal. No sickness, they didn't age, they were just there until they ran amok. Then, not only did God send them out, and all the other, or the major ones, is the way they interpreted it, he had to go out then and work by the sweat of his brow. He had to toil the earth, and up till then, all he did was lay around there in the garden, and everything was there without him working. But the way they interpreted those kinds of myths is not only was he driven out and had to go out and work to feed himself, not only that, he then began to age and suffer the infamies of aging, that is, illness. That up until then, there was no such thing as illness. And that we're now ill because of one thing. We screwed around with God. We made God mad. We offended him. Up until then, we would have never died. We would have never aged. And of course, conversely to that is most religions' ideas. That is one of the descriptions of a rewarding paradise, if you live the right life, is that we'll return to that state. That heaven, paradise, is a place wherein above all things there is no aging and certainly no death, that you have now overcome it. So, even the would-be New Agers, the would-be mystics of all stripes, they take illness. They will grab it in a heartbeat. Well, how are we going to start? A bunch of guys get together and say, God, I like the idea of mysticism. One says, I do too. One says to the other one, well, you're pretty charismatic and you got a loud voice. Why don't you start a mystical group and I'll be your first member? And they go, why not? So they started off. They attract, they got their own bullhorn, their own, with a certain kind of pizzazz and panache to it, and several people show up and go, hey, we like the cut of your bullhorn. What are you up to? They go, we're after higher states of being, transcended states of consciousness. And they go, well, hey, I like the idea of that too. How do we go about it? And it, without fail, they just constantly do it. The guy with the charisma and the loudest voice goes, you got cancer? No? Did your mother have cancer? How about an uncle? A cousin? All right, a cousin, that's good enough. Are you close to her? You were. It's horrible, isn't it? She got cancer. Is she going to die? Well, good. Come over here. And people never question it. Did it now, and they will take it. As I said, I have no doubt. Well, I know it for a fact, but I have no doubt that they're using cancer per se. But illness has always been, if these would-be mystics have at all any fleetness of verbal and neural foot, they will come up with the idea that, in general, they start off with the idea that life here is somewhat of an imposition. Ordinary life. We got to work, we suffer, we don't have enough money, it's always raining. You're not as good looking as you should have been to match your internal beauty and all that. But then, to make it more specific, what is the easiest thing to pick on? If you're going to holler, if you're just, to change the metaphor again right quick, that you want to start your own wolf pack, and anybody that was tied in tonight, all wolf packs, anyway, there's no such thing as a chosen leader of a wolf pack. The leaders of wolf packs choose themselves. That's the only way you do it. That's what makes too many of simple people, and they don't know it, it makes them look upon the whole idea of elected governments, Western democracies it's called now. To many people throughout the world, if you don't know it, they look at that and it looks kind of almost shameful. Probably most of you won't get that. But it's like wolves going out and saying, would you vote for me? Here's my little wolf wife and all my little wolf children. I go to church. I'm a nice guy. And I've never been arrested for a felony at least. There's something, and this has nothing to do with governments. It has nothing to do with different peoples in the world. I'm just using a hardwired example that there right now, things are just moving at such a different time zones within the parade, but there are people right here on this planet that look at Western democracies and people asking to be elected head of the wolf pack and all trying to be civil and all dressed up and treating each other genteelly. That it's all on the basis of elect me head of the wolf pack. And their minds all over the world having nothing to do with government, that they see this, they become knowledgeable this is going on, and it's almost embarrassing to them. And also, you do not have to be from a third world country. If you can move up and down your own nervous system, you can look at that. Next time you flip on TV and see it for yourself, sitting right there. In the privacy of your own, I started to say third world area of your nervous system, but I won't say that. You can say that. But you can look right there, and from one sense, it's not right or wrong, but from one sense to see a man saying, elect me prime minister, elect me president, and here's what I'll do. From one sense, you can look and think, you almost want to turn your head. Because it's not necessarily true in the individual case, but it's almost as though a neutered wolf has now put on sharp-looking clothes and maybe insinuating that he might have some brass knucks in his pocket. But it looks like he's almost been neutered, and he's trying to get up, and he's trying to lower his voice and go, vote for me for president, and boy, you'll have a good wolf on your side. And if you look in a certain way, you think, that ain't much of a wolf. Everything works out, though, because it's no longer that necessary. But I was trying to hint to you something else. A wolf seizes control of a pack. When someone attempts to start their own form of some sort of mystical activity, whether it be a religion or just a cult in the mystical sense, the only way they can do it is to seize it, is to announce that they have done it. And if they attract any attention, somebody shows up and they hear all the howling, and they go, oh, what is it? And you give them the description, like my magazine, like all religions. He says, well, we're interested in transforming ourselves into some advanced state, some higher state of consciousness or being. And people go, good, what can we do? Where are you going to start? What you have got to latch on to something, and I don't mean they analyze it, I'm just showing you that it works without fail. They will turn right to human suffering. And I just kept throwing cancer at you because that's all I see on the covers of magazines now. Yoga and cancer. Zen and cancer. Christian mysticism and, believe it or not, cancer. It's just the disease of the month or the decade. But it is all, that is just a more specific. It just sounds as though that they're a little more advanced than just saying, well, all of life is suffering. Because somebody can start a magazine or try and start a new mystical group and say, life is suffering, that's our basic tenet. Our purpose is to reach higher states, but we start off, we've got to start somewhere, and our basic tenet is life is suffering. And somebody that's read more than 3 or 4 books is going to go, well, wait a minute, there was a guy in India already did that 5,000 years ago. And you go, really? Oh, okay. Well, I knew that. Yeah, oh yeah, I know who you mean, but we got more specifically. Life is not just suffering. Life is like an extremely bad wisdom tooth. That didn't sound right. Cancer! Cancer! So it just seems as though they have narrowed it down. Whereas somebody 5,000 years ago, when mysticism wasn't near as advanced as it is today, there's somebody over in some poor area of the subcontinent, some rural area, said all of life is suffering. And hey, that might have been all right for 5,000 years ago. But today, by God, this is the modern age. This scientific age, we've got to be a bit more specific. Life is cancer. But also, I repeat one more time, if they're good at all, they will take suffering and or cancer somewhere along the way. They will not ignore, they will not abandon actual physical illness. No one will, not any ordinary person, but they will even make passing attempts to turn illness or cancer into a metaphor, and they'll just say, well, what it does is represent the suffering that under which men must live. We must struggle against it, we must pray, we must meditate, we must, whatever they're thinking, we must do certain postures, that is not, in any way, that is not the same thing as actually trying to reach a transcendent state of consciousness. Because if you stay there and work with an imaginary problem, I put it at the beginning, so I guess it got lost. Remember the opening? Today's non-physical medical news. The way to keep a problem existing is to keep talking about what a problem it is. The way you stay, the way life keeps humans, in one sense, in their present state of consciousness, is that they believe that their present state of consciousness represents some sort of problem. And that's not much of a stretch for life to do that, because all you got to do is have an intellect fired up and see, and you've already played it, you've been thrown out of Eden. Once you started talking, your parents, you can look at them as God, they threw you out of Eden very shortly. That is, they started holding you responsible. Now that you can talk, they say don't throw food. And you can't anymore go, once they find out that you can talk, they say, I told you not to throw food, and then you get it. You've become responsible. After that, no one ever feels satisfied. Not in the same way that a lion laying out in the grass after a full meal does. Everyone feels as though life to some degree is suffering. It's discomforting. I can't be completely satisfied. The way to keep a problem is to keep talking about and thinking about what a problem it is. Therefore, trying to cure the natural state of man, which is based upon an internal duality between his mind, his intellect, and his older instinctive self, just as it should be. There's the sensation of this duality, and it is, without it being understood, is the basis of what seems to be this internal conflict, the problems, the suffering. Not cancer, the metaphor for cancer. And as long as you keep talking about it and thinking of it as being a problem, you can't get away from it. In other words, if you don't ever see it, the idea that trying to cure my present state will pay off. The crude version of that, if you don't catch it, the crude version, let's take Christianity. If you live a good life of a Christian, suffering and all, they say that it won't stop you from suffering. You have to put up with it. You're still going to die. You may get cancer. But if you lived a good life, then after you die, it's all okay. You understand that you have got to work on it now, but the payoff will be in the future. It will the payoff will be from putting up with this and working on it, trying to do your best under these egregious circumstances of being a human on this planet. But if you do your best, pay your money to the church, are faithful to, as much as possible to their teachings, then when you die, you reach a higher state of consciousness. It seems to be the direct cause and effect, that if you do this, it will pay off. That the hunger to cure what you are now, to be a Christian, that is to overcome sin, your duality, that it will turn into a higher state. But notice, the best they can say is after death, which I'll point out to you again, there is no refund counter. That is why, without them understanding it and being aware of it, they are making the same admission as I'm telling you, that the attempt to cure one's sinful condition is not the same thing as being cured. The attempt to be a Christian under these adverse circumstances is not the same as achieving it. The attempt to cure your present state of consciousness is not the same thing as striving for another one. Because this one is not sick. It can't be cured. You're wasting your time. But hey, said someone in the back, I got lots of time. As always, people in the back, you got me again.